Dudes with wrenches here. People often ask me, when you buy so many cars, how do you know what a good buy looks like? Well, let's talk about a few pointers when it comes to buying classic cars. Well, the first step to buying a classic car is probably the most obvious step, and that's deciding what you actually want to do with the car you're buying, and you'll probably know that before you even go look at it. So if it's a full restoration you're looking at doing, if you're looking at just reliving a good old memory, or buying that car that Dad never could, so maybe you could rub it in his face. I'm not really sure what your cake and eat it too situation is, but for this car, let's talk about a quick flipper. Now, once you've landed on the idea of let's just fix it and send it down the road, you gotta keep the thought in your head, we can't spend too much if we're gonna make any money here. Now, bear with me, we may touch on a few touchy subjects like the mental health of a car guy, but here we go. Step number 2 in the car you want to sell, don't fall in love with it. It always helps to buy a car you didn't really like in the first place, because once you fall in love, it's hard to let it go. Because come on, we've all been there. You fall in love with a car you didn't really want, but all of a sudden it becomes something you keep, and you become financially responsible for it, and you put too much money in, and there's no profit to be gained. And then you just keep it by sheer stubbornness, because now you know you can never get out what you put in. So you gotta drive it a little to get that money back. So it's always a good idea to do a full assessment of your project before you start pouring in the funds. And what I mean by that is give it a good once over, decide if it's worth your money or if it's better just to flip it right as it sits and do really nothing but try to collect that cash. Now, definitely do as I say, not as I do, because this car was definitely bought as a quick flipper, but sadly, I'm kind of falling in love with it. And we're probably going to keep it, but that's just what we do. So definitely focus on the goal, stick with the goal, and make it definitely the goal. Because if you don't, you end up like us, hoarding way too many cars that aren't getting put back on the road quick enough, and you can only have so much money to spread around. But let's go back to why this is a good flipper. Now, you can only trust things with a grain of salt at the end of the day. Previous owner told us that this car was actually last driven in 2018. Now, that does mean a lot of good things. It hasn't been off the road too long to say that it has, but long enough that there could be some potential problems due to the fact it has not been driven. And a good, for instance, is all the electronics that live inside this car. None of them could be tested when we purchased it, so it's all up in the air on what's going to come back to bite us in the end. Because I bet that digital dash isn't cheap to repair. Let's go check out what's hiding under the hood so we can give this thing a real rundown. Now that right there is a simple small block 302, high output mind you. Now this engine, we do not know if it runs, so we're definitely going to have to figure that out. There will be maybe a little video about that at some point, but we know the parts are cheap, and it should be really easy to get this engine purring like a kitten. Now this thing's backed up by an AOD overdrive, and we have paperwork saying it's about brand new, and it has brand new exhaust running all the way back, and brand new tires circa 2018. Now, that all being said, here's how we're going to break down the value of this vehicle and let you know if it was a good buy. The reality here is we only paid $1,100 for this car at auction, and it only cost us about $100 to bring it home. We did actually title this car and get it all put in our name. That cost us a little more money, so let's just say we're about $1,500 to $1,800 into this before we even know if it runs. Now, maybe that's not a good investment. They aren't worth a whole lot, so there's not a lot of profit margin to be gained here. So here's the other reality of anything you're buying, is that it's only value is the sum of all of its parts. So knowing that this thing potentially has a good motor and transmission or a rebuildable version, the motor and transmission's worth about $1,000, the wheels and tires are worth say about $500, and then there's a lot of miscellaneous parts around this car that can only be acquired from this exact car. And it being kind of a rarer car per se, less popular, makes those parts a lot more valuable to the guy that wants to restore his. So you have to look at it. If you can't sell it and you can't fix it, it can always be parted. Now let's bring you back around to a completely other project car that you'd be getting into, and that's your standard classic rebuild. Now, this is anything but standard, but it is a classic, mind you, so that's why it gets to be a part of this video. And I don't mind rubbing my bad decisions in everybody's face. Because, hey, if you can learn from my bad decisions, I welcome you to it, because I know I never will. Now, this is just the classic story of you just wanting to own a classic car to go cruise in. You're not trying to make a race car here. You're not trying to rebuild the world. You're just trying to get something safe enough to go down the road in that isn't completely rusted off of itself. So you go out and you find yourself the cheapest classic you can find that you can drive home. And that's usually a Ford because they're cheaper up front, but they definitely bite you on the backside because everything it takes to make it go again costs twice as much as it should. But let's not bash brands here because that could be a video all in itself. Now, on the idea that you gotta cut your teeth somewhere, a 4-door is a good option. This car on face value is manual brakes, manual steering, 4-wheel drum, no upgrades whatsoever. A nice, if you will, untouched classic car, which is really hard to come by, because upgrades do not always add value if they were done incorrectly. And on that note, don't think you have to have all the fancy power steering and power brakes. People drove these cars for decades before that stuff was ever around. Here again, a basic Ford small block 302, one of the cheapest Ford motors you're gonna get into. Now the V8 being there is going to add a little extra value to this ride, only because in a lot of instances, Dodge, Ford, sometimes Chevrolet, if you have a factory V8 in the car, it came with a lot of additional things that came with that V8, like suspension, upgraded rear differential, and brakes. Don't mind that rust hole right there. This was a cheap car. You're going to have a few of those. And hey, here's a pro tip. Check under the battery because a lot of times batteries create rust. So if you want the go fast and the handle good parts of the day, definitely look for a factory V8 car. One of the next tips we're going to talk about is body lines. Always look down your car at all the body lines to make sure they look good and straight, because that's going to tell you a lot about the car. But another big one is open and close your doors, because it speaks volumes about your classic car. Now, this thing's from 1964, so you're going to expect a little rust. Now, we have not seen any actual restoration done to these floorboards, so having a little rust in it is definitely okay with me because we can patch that right up. Having 5 layers of pop-riveted fiberglass goo in there is definitely not preferred. So not to state the obvious here, rust bad, definitely don't let it be in places that you can't repair. But hey, nothing a few license plates won't fix if that's what you're into. Now let's talk parts availability, because there's a lot of classic cars out there that you may get cheap up front, like we said before, but parts availability is an impossibility, and you can't buy anything for it. So then you end up buying a second one or a third one just to get the precious little gold that you need to get your car back on the road. Now that all being said, let's break down this buy. This is a 1964 Ford Fairlane with a small block 302, a C6, and a Ford 8. These are all good components. Like I said before, there's no real upgrades to this car. It's just a plain Jane classic cruiser. It was a running and driving car until my OCD got the better of me and I blew it into pieces, as I do. Don't do that. It's a bad habit. But if you got to, you got to. They're definitely more reliable that way, or, they look good on jack stands. That's what I tell myself anyway. Well, enough about my bad habits. We went and looked at this car for all of about 20 minutes. We decided to buy it when we weren't going to buy a car that day. We spent money, not to say that it was a lot. We actually gave the guy quite a few gift cards in exchange for the purchase. And we drove it home, and that's a lot to be said. There is many videos on this vehicle you can check out on the channel. Just a little channel plug there. But was it a good investment? Yeah, that's yet to be seen, because we're now currently going through every inch of it due to the OCD I said before, and this thing's going to be a reliable road rig for years to come. Now, bear with me, we'll break down all three of these options at the end, but here's option number 3, and that's you save a lot of money, you save a lot of time, you decide what you want, and then you go get what you want, exactly how it should be, with very little work to be done to that vehicle. It goes back to the old back and forth on built, bought, built but not bought, built but bought, built. Yeah, it's all conjecture at the end of the day. They were built by someone, you bought it, you may have had to rebuild it at some point, but it is nice to have one that's just perfect right from the factory with super low miles. And that's exactly what this car is. My wife wanted this exact car. It took me 11 years to find one in perfect condition. We looked at many, we bought one. The idea of buying a bunch of them and rebuilding them was on the table, but you can obviously see I have enough projects to go around, and she wanted one she could drive, not watch me build. Now, when you go out and you do the third option of let's just buy what we want and make it right, there's a lot more things you need to look at, because when you're spending a lot more money than you regularly would on a rebuilder, it matters. So you want to look at things like, do the doors open properly? Does it have good seals? Do all the windows work? All your basic things that may be expensive and tedious to fix later need to work up front if you're going to really give the money that these things are worth. When somebody gives $30,000, $40,000, $60,000 for a classic car, they're not giving that kind of money for one with problems. And if they are, they need to do their due diligence to make sure it's a better car for their money. So that goes back to the big question, is it worth more money just because it's all original? Well, the reality there is it's only original once, and as long as no one has severely changed or modified it, it is still in original form. You get to be the first person to put the original miles on that vehicle, and that is something special to be able to do. Now, it's also fun to completely build your car from the ground up and put those miles on it from new to you. Second reality to buying something you definitely wanted for the right price. This car has great paint on it. It's not perfect, but it's really good for its age, and it's very easy to take care of. Now, if you were to buy a car that just needed painted and was in really good shape, the cost of paint alone may double the value of the vehicle depending on what you spent. So when you think that price is outrageous up front, you have to realize the other car you may have bought, after putting a little money into the motor, a little money into the drivetrain, and putting some paint on it, you have spent way more than what you would have if it was just all original stock with the original paint. Now, a lot of these things don't really matter. It's all about what you want, and that's why this option is about exactly what you want. And for instance, this car has great interior. That's another thing we don't have to do after the fact, because finding all the exact original beautiful little pieces of interior can be almost impossible and very expensive. Interior is one of those things that gets overlooked because you don't think recovering a seat is going to cost you $1,000. Now let's do a buyer breakdown of this bad boy, and let me tell you everything about it. Now, this thing is a 1966 sports sedan Impala, which makes it a four-door hardtop.
Let me tell him how I special ordered it.
Okay, old-timer, we'll let you explain it.
That's right, you young whippersnapper. You know, back in 1966, I wanted myself a nice four-door family car, but I wanted the sport package, and we got to the hard top here, you see. And then I didn't want none of that new fancy fandangling things, but I do like myself some power steering and some power brakes, so it's got both those. And, I didn't like the music of the time, so she's a factory radio delete. And, I wasn't trusting them new fandangled V8s of the time, so I got her with the good old inline six engine. She's durable. I had one back in my 51. It was a good motor. Now back to you, boy. Now they know everything about this factory original car that I special ordered.
This is definitely a special ordered car with all the exact boxes checked due to the fact that this is a 250 inline six backed up by a 2-speed power glide with those luxury items like power steering and power brakes. It being a sports sedan, 4-door hardtop, like I said before, makes it a real nice sleek look even though it's a 4-door. Now that all being said, this car is exactly what we wanted and we got exactly what we got. Spend your money wisely. Get the things you want up front so you don't have to change them later. If you don't need performance and you don't need a hot rod, you can buy a classic cruiser a lot cheaper than you can buy a race car. Because at the end of the day, a really nice Chevelle with a big block can get outran by a new Kia. So it's something to think about when you're investing all your money in Go Fast factory parts. Now back to the was this a good buy? We actually gave only 10 grand for this car, which was an absolute steal for what we received. Now we have had to do basic maintenance items from literally just sitting around. The car only has under 22,000 original miles, so there was a lot of little things that had to be touched and gone through at minimal cost, just so the car could be good and reliable and safe to be in. Because nobody wants to spend a bunch of money on an all-original classic and pile it into a ditch because of a bad wheel cylinder that's 50 years old. My wife absolutely loves driving this car, and people love to see it because it is a perfect example of a classic car that was well maintained and taken care of. Yes, it was put away and sheltered for a majority of its life and never driven, but we're going to make up for that, and we're going to put as many miles as we can put on this car on every nice day we can get a hold of. So that's the goal with this thing. Just drive the wheels off it until we got to repair something major that involves maybe a little bit of an upgrade. So everybody, just remember, you have 3 options here, and it's all about what you want to do. And at the end of the day, you can flip cars, you can earn money, you can just drive something because you enjoy it. You can put something together, you can fully restore something. It's all based on your skill, ability, tools, etc. Or you can buy exactly what you want right up front and deal with the problems that creates when you do that. Now, don't let anyone tell you any of these options are a good buy. There's no such thing. It's all about investment. It's all about what you want at the end of the day. If you want to flip cars, flip cars. You obviously care more about profits than cars. If you just want to drive something, fix it and drive it. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be restored. And then the other option is, if you want a perfect car, then go buy your perfect car. Don't let anyone tell you any different, that it was wrong of you to buy it instead of build it. You can go right down to a dealership right now and buy your perfect car. It doesn't have to be a classic. You do not have to know how to restore and rebuild vehicles to enjoy them. So please, everybody, if you like all of this rambling, like, share, subscribe. And like always, have a good day.
I always did love this old car, I like the point he's making here. Nobody can put a price on your passion. You gotta know what you want, and you gotta go get it in life. Yeah. And then you get old like me, and you don't even drive a car that's perfectly good that you bought and paid money for. But, the next guy's gonna enjoy it. That's what I always told myself.